Hello. Welcome to the planet's premier medical cannabis education channel, unabashedly sponsored by the University of New Mexico's Medical Cannabis Research Fund. Now today I want to talk about something that's really important. That is, what are the likely negative side effects of cannabis usage? Obviously this is important for patients that are perhaps naive to cannabis usage, or patients that are dealing with health sensitivities or dealing with significant health issues and they don't want to further impair their health status or endure added side effects. Likewise, we've just heard so many negative things about cannabis usage for generations and generations by our government, right? So we're all aware of this. But what are the true negative side effects? And there are some. There are true negative side effects, and I talk about them all the time. It's something that is interesting. So, I'm engaged in a lot of talks and education. I'm a professor. I'm in front of hundreds of people talking about this stuff all day long. I go to conventions. Sometimes I see talks, lectures about cannabis usage and its effects and so forth, and the whole thing is just completely negative. So, basically the theme is to identify potential negative side effects and then to really just kind of magnify or amplify them to give the audience the impression that they're relatively frequent, prevalent, and serious. And that is in actuality not the case. All right? So there have been formal studies and meta-analyses at this point that have documented all the possible negative side effects of cannabis usage, at least reported in randomized controlled trials. And they've essentially archived thousands of potential experiences or negative effects that patients have reported. So there's thousands of potential negative side effects. Now, the point that I need to make is that the vast majority of these negative side effects that have been reported are not serious. So the most likely reported negative side effect in these meta-analyses are just the recurrence of their previously existing health condition. That is, that cannabis then essentially help them, right? But that is the most frequent negative side effect of using cannabis, which is not really an effect of cannabis usage. They're really just kind of projecting based on perhaps the ineffectiveness of cannabis for their particular situation. Now, let me just give you some insights from our own information. So we have been working with the developers of the Relief app, which is basically a software program that is designed to enable patients to record the characteristics of the products that they use and also their real-time symptom intensity changes. So it allows patients to essentially document or archive what they've used and the effects of that usage so that they could make more informed consumption and product purchases in the future and so forth, right? So it's called the Relief app. It's really an amazing tool, and I encourage all of you to download it. It's free and it's quite helpful. But by working with this company, we've essentially amassed the largest database of real-time effects of cannabis usage in the United States, literally. So we literally have over 100,000 user sessions on basically how people have reported experiencing the effects from all different types of products. So, from flower to concentrates to edibles and so forth from all over the country and all over the world. So it's really interesting, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have a whole bunch of information and probably the best data set in the country, to be honest, at this point. And part of what the Relief app records is negative side effects during a cannabis usage session. And I could tell you that many folks do report negative side effects, but again, they're relatively benign. So it might be sleepy or feeling a little bit groggy, or perhaps confusion or forgetfulness, something like that. So again, when we're talking about relative negative side effects, it's really apples and oranges compared to many classes of conventional pharmaceutical medications where, the side effects range from, maybe some biomarker disruptions to GI disruptions, major disruptions to, being lethal to their toxicity levels. So let me tell you directly again what our data suggests, and what we have found is that the most commonly reported side effects in general from this giant data set tend to be what we characterize as positive side effects. And specifically, these are feeling 1, peaceful, feeling 2, comfortable, and feeling 3, happy. So those are the most commonly reported side effects, that is, unanticipated effects of cannabis usage. The least frequently reported side effects tend to be those that we would characterize as negative. So again, these might be feeling paranoid or feeling sleepy. We've written on all these topics, obviously, and we've conducted many different types of studies on all these different types of symptoms and so forth. But I tend to joke that, a lot of the paranoia that folks report experiencing from consumption of cannabis is probably the result of it being illegal, right? So if it wasn't illegal, then people probably wouldn't be as paranoid. Likewise, people tend to have particular issues when they smell like cannabis smoke. So again, it's just kind of that whole mark of shame that we've conditioned to just absorb. Again, that anybody that uses cannabis is a bad person. If we use cannabis, we're bad, and we should hide that from people and so forth. But hey, we're dispelling all those myths, right? So when it comes to negative side effects, I can tell you with certainty that there are 3 types of negative side effects that are commonly experienced for cannabis users. The first one is addiction. Cannabis is addicting. Now, we could talk about the concept of addiction, how it's defined, how it's used by practitioners and so forth. So, in terms of the concept, we can presumably be addicted to both positive and negative habits, right? So we're addicted to love, we're addicted to healthy food, we're addicted to healthy air and so forth. So those are all positive addictions. Or you could take the stance that all addictions are basically behavioral patterns of consumption or engagement in activities that are inherently negative. So if you ascribe to that notion that all addictions are negative, then you've already assumed that cannabis usage has no medicinal benefits. Because if you assume that it has medicinal benefits, then you have to wrestle with the logic of overusing something that is beneficial. And it gets into a complicated theoretical place, right? So the concept of addiction, again, has been morally loaded historically, and as practitioners, we've been conditioned and educated from the societies down that addictions are negative things. But I can tell you that cannabis usage is addicting. And there's 2 possibilities. 1, people may be using it like zombies even when they don't want to use it, and they're just kind of slaves to the plant. Or 2, that they find that it improves their life and they're making a responsible decision to endure the relative negative consequences for the relative benefits that they ascribe to cannabis usage. So I'll leave it up to you to determine which of those 2 situations is taking place with regard to addiction. Now, a second negative side effect that is commonly experienced by users is short-term impairments in judgment, that is decisions that are being made, as well as behavioral functioning. Okay, so there are certainly athletes that train on cannabis in really intense ways at a professional level. So we don't quite know how cannabis affects our fine motor movement and larger motor movement and so forth, but there are studies that show that cannabis can impair our things like our balance, for example. Okay, so just basic behavioral functioning. And then likewise, obviously there's cognitive impairment that can come along with cannabis usage. Now, that impairment is not to suggest that people are acting crazy or irresponsibly or engaging in risks or certainly aggressive acts, because those are not the types of outcomes that at least we observe as researchers. But presumably there are short-term impairments like judgments and memory and our ability to retrieve, or perhaps to dictate the memory in the first place, or to, capture certain types of information. So what I do want you to know is that there are definitely negative side effects from cannabis usage. They're relatively benign, they're relatively non-serious, and users are more likely to experience a positive side effect. And again, the most frequently reported is feelings of peacefulness. So, relative to other conventional medications, you could turn your bottle around and look at all the side effects. You could listen to the commercials, list all the side effects endlessly, and they're quite atrocious, aren't they? Relative to those medications, cannabis is something that I could easily recommend patients with serious health conditions to experiment with. And I could also recommend people with common health conditions like anxiety, depression, and pain to also experiment using it. And maybe you start low and go slow, but in terms of negative side effects, most people are better off using cannabis than the stuff that you've been conditioned to be taking your whole life, right? So welcome aboard, and we're all in this together. I say that all the time. I'll see you next time.